What is going on, YouTube? Is that what I say? Or
We're
do I
here.
say what up?
We're here for another informative video, and this time we're talking about counter traps. We're going to title this video "Counter Traps and You," and we're going to talk about the differences between some of them and identifying their cost and what makes them good, what makes them bad, why, and we're going to talk about more in depth about Spell Speed 3 than we did in our Spells and Trap card video.
Because this is all about counter traps and you.
Yes. Okay, so the first card I'm going to talk about is a card on the ban list, and that's Solemn Judgment. Notice the wording on Solemn Judgment. When a monster would be summoned or a spell or trap card is activated, you pay half your life points, semicolon, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy it. So, if you notice, the semicolon, right, is after the pay half your life points, which means that is a cost.
And yeah, then this card also works differently than most others because this card might as well literally say on it no. Because you'll be hard pressed to find anything that this card cannot stop.
Yes.
Actually, it can't stop continuous effects, I guess.
Yeah,
and by that, it can't stop spells like Breakthrough Skill in the Grave.
Yeah. Okay, so a good example of why it's on the ban list is it's always active, right? You can always pay half your life points. Doesn't matter, even if you have an odd number, you should be able to go down half of it, since Yu-Gi-Oh! You start with 8,000. So even if you had like 7,100, you'd still get like 3,550.
Something like that.
Yeah. All right.
So it was
next
too
card,
good.
Yeah. All right. So the next card we're going to talk about is Solemn Warning.
Helps if I'm on the right one.
Solemn Warning. Warning is when a monster would be summoned, or when a spell or trap or monster effect is activated that includes the special summon of a monster or monsters, you pay 2,000 life points to get the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Now, I want you to pay attention to its wording on when a monster or monsters would be summoned, or a spell or trap card or monster effect that is activated includes a special summon, and how it can negate spells, traps, and monster effects, as well as inherent summons, like normal summons and all the other summons we covered in our other video. The reason Warning works the way it does is because it specifically says it can negate spells, traps, and monster effects that include special summonings.
Yes, it can stop things like Macrocosmos, even if the opponent was not planning on using that effect. It can stop, what's another optional? What's a meta-relevant optional one? Well, I mean, as long as it lists that it can special summon something and it's part of that particular effect resolving, you typically can hit it with Solemn Warning. What you cannot hit, though, is like Fusion Gate on the field. You cannot hit that because that's like a continuous effect resolving, and it doesn't say spell or trap effect. It says spell or trap card. Keyword there is card.
Also notice, like I said, its semicolon is after the 2,000 life points, so you have to pay that cost before negating the summon or the activation of the card that does summon.
Yeah.
Okay. So next card we're gonna move on to is Solemn Strike. Now, Solemn Strike, we've had some confusion, or we've heard some confusion over this card. So it says, so we're gonna read it. When a monster or monsters would be special summoned or a monster effect is activated, you pay 1,500 life points, negate the summon or activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Now, what this means is, it's negating of a special summon can only hit inherent summons. So it cannot hit ritual summons. It cannot hit monster effects that bring the special summon other monsters. And it cannot bring out it cannot bring out any spell or trap card or any monster effect or any ritual spells or anything like that that would throw out a special summon monster.
Actually, it can hit monster effects still.
Oh yes, it can hit monster
effects. It hits monster effects. Don't listen to him on that. It actually, and it's almost better at hitting monster effects than Solemn Warning does, because it doesn't care if that monster effect is going to special summon. It just says when a monster effect is activated.
Yeah, so it can't, but yeah, it can't hit spells or trap cards. So you can't activate a ritual spell and then flip up a Solemn Strike to negate it, because that's not an inherent summon. And in our summoning video, we talked about what inherent summoning means. And the reason it's worded like this is we're going to look at Black Horn of Heaven, because Black Horn of Heaven is also a card that can only hit an inherent special summon. So notice this wording. When your opponent would special summon exactly one monster, negate the special summon, and if you do, destroy it. So it's worded almost exactly the same as Solemn Strike. The only difference is Solemn Strike can hit multiple monsters being special summoned at once, like through a pendulum summon, whereas Blackhorn can't. And Solemn Strike also has a 1500 life point cost as well. So we've heard confusion over this card and what it can and can't hit, and if you're a newer player, I am hoping that this clears it up. If you're a veteran player and weren't sure, then I'm hoping you now know, and you can look forward to the future and how to use this card properly. Right, moving along, we're going to talk about cards like Magic Jammer. Alright, so Magic Jammer is a old one that only negates spell cards, but its cost is a little bit different than the ones we talked about. So its cost is discarding a card. And like I said, like we covered in our last ones, the ones that like how to identify at cost on a lot of these is look for the semicolon. So notice after the discard one card, it said there's a semicolon there. So and then you have to discard the card first, then your opponent has a chance to respond to it. But if they can only respond to all of these in all of our examples with another counter trap, which is spell speed 3. Have anything to add to that, Stefan?
Yes, there's an exception to that one, and it's Fabled Unicorn, because it's a continuous effect that negates, and if you made your hand the exact same size as theirs, it just automatically negates it because it's a continuous. So there's also instances where you can protect cards like Vendred. The Vendred Ritual spell, let me find it here, Revendred Origin. If your Vendred is on the field and you activate its effect and they strike it, you can still activate Revendred Origin to protect it. Because, once again,
it's not technically an activated effect, that's a replacement effect.
Yeah, it's replacement effect.
We'll talk about replacement effects in a later video, but that is a pretty good example of something that can get around counter traps as spell speed 3.
And there is another counter trap we really haven't talked about, and that's Solemn Scolding, which works exactly like Judgment, I believe, except for you don't pay half of your life points, and its conditions to play it are way super ridiculous. So that's another one that you may or may not see. I doubt you will, but I'd still like to cover it as a card.
To cover it really fast, the Solemn Scolding card he's speaking of, to cover it really fast, it negates anything, but it has to be the only set spell or trap card, and you pay 3,000 life points. So it can negate anything, except for a spell or trap card effect. Like, it's worded almost exactly the same as Warning, or not Warning, but Judgment. So it can negate anything but the cost of 3,000 life points, which sounds good, and why it's not, but why it doesn't see a lot of play is it has to be the only card set in your spell and trap card zone.
It dies to this format's removal.
Yeah. So we're going to move along to a card that was popular during HAT format, and HAT stands for Hands, Artifacts, and Trap Tricks, which is Wiretap. Wiretap was a popular sideboard card then because that was a very heavy traps matter type of meta. So we're going to read it here, and it's when a trap is activated negate the activation, and if you do, shuffle that card into the deck. Now, why this card is so much better than other cards that negate traps is it has no cost. And it's quote unquote like its downside is that they could redraw that trap. But it's a lot better than it looks. But
yeah. Wiretap also, the theory behind why that card was played and why it could see play again if we get into a counter trap heavy format is that you have to pay the cost, and if you put a card back into the deck, it makes it worse than what it is. Because if you activate your Solemn Strike and they wiretap it away, you still paid that 1,500, and now you have a chance to draw that Solemn Strike again. And if you're running the typical 2 copies of Strike, now you have a third time it can be resolved. That's effectively you're playing with 4,500 less life points, is the theory. Or you could dead draw that when your life points are too low.
Also, there are cards that have effects when they're destroyed, like they're trap cards that, Artifact Sanctum. If it's destroyed, you get to destroy one card on the field. So, and Wiretap got around that because it would stop their trap card from activating. But unlike our next card, Dark Bribe, which destroys a spell or trap card that negates it, and its downside is your opponent's drawing a card. So, what Wiretap would do is you would shuffle it back into the deck so they wouldn't get the destruction effect, whereas Dark Bribe would give it the destruction effect because it just had to be in your possession and destroyed by an opponent's card effect. So it didn't matter that it got hit by a counter trap and everything, because it would start a separate chain, and then it would just get to destroy one of your opponent's cards, and they essentially went -2.
Yeah, it felt terrible because it also gave them that draw.
Yeah.
Think of it at -3.
Yeah. So the next card, I just threw this up here because it's one of the only counter traps that actually negate monster attacks. Most of them don't, and this also ends the battle phase, and that's negate attack.
Oh.
If you notice, all of them, all the trap cards that we've shown have like when an opponent's monster declares an attack, or when an opponent does this, or when an opponent does that, because counter traps are supposed to be reactionary things. They're supposed to be your opponent does something, so you're going to activate a counter trap to counter what they're doing. Why
you activated my trap.
Yes. So negate attacks just kind of up here because it's like one of the few of its kind that actually has to do with the battle phase. That actually has to like negate attacks and everything, because there are ones that deal with the battle phase, but this is one of the few ones that just kind of actually deals with attacks. So I figured it was somewhat relevant to put up here. And then for our last counter trap is 9 Pillars.
9 Pillars of Yang Zing.
Okay, so if you know that, okay, so 9 Pillars of Yang Zing says when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated and you control a Yang Zing card, you negate the activation. If you do, shuffle that card in the deck, then you have to destroy one of your Yang Zing cards, one other Yang Zing card you control. Now, we put this up here as an example of you needing a monster or you needing another card on the field to activate this counter trap. You can't just go.
Here's the kicker: if it's activated and your opponent somehow, not sure how, but it probably could happen, gets rid of your Yang Zing, the 9 Pillars will still go off and negate the card, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is all about resolving the card as far as possible if it was correct to activate at the time.
Yeah, so we're going to look at the cost. So the cost is you have to have... Okay, so here's the condition. When a spell, trap card, or monster effect is activated and you control a Yang Zing card. That's the condition, and there is no cost to this card other than having the Yang Zing could be considered... A Yang Zing card could be considered a cost or a downside, but besides that, this card actually has no cost. It just has a clause. Like, you need this to have... Like, you need a Yang Zing card
Yeah,
because the destruction of it, of the Yang Zing card that you control, that it says on the bottom line, is part of the effect and not part of the cost.
It is, what is that old School of Rock saying? Can't remember it at this point, but it's...
Anyway, yeah.
What was that song? It was a good song, though.
Okay, so I realized that there's something I forgot to bring up with negate attack. If your opponent has a card that states, when this card attacks, your opponent cannot activate anything until the end of the damage step, like Utopia the Lightning, you cannot activate, like if you have negate attack down, and then your opponent has Utopia the Lightning out, you cannot activate negate attack. I know that sounds pretty self-explanatory. You shouldn't be able to activate negate attack, but I wanted to make sure that you guys know that you can't do that because negate attack only activates when the monster attacks. So when the monster already declares the attack, you can't activate it. Also, Utopia the Lightning and Armadius as cards, you cannot strike them because their effects are not active. They do not activate. They
are continuous.
Yes. We'll need to talk about continuous effects and stuff like that in a later video as well. But overall, my judgment on counter traps is the only ones you should play are the extremely versatile ones. Like Strike is pretty versatile, and so is Solemn Warning as a whole. So I think that if you're gonna run counter traps, I don't think you should bog it down with Magic Jammers or Wiretaps or Dark Bribes in your main deck or negate attacks in your main deck, because I think they take away from your deck a lot more than you would think. Nine Pillars is an example of, if you're going to play an archetype that wants the counter trap and has their own counter trap, then yeah, you would play it.
Nine Pillars was only good because it was searchable. Yeah. I mean, yes, it's still a good card and it's great to draw, but it was super good because of how searchable it was and the fact of how generic Denlong was. I mean, that card was made for him. It was just like, Denlong, get it, play it. I played the dinosaur deck that played the Yang Zings with this. It was pretty fun. It felt unfair having a counter trap searchable that stops practically everything other than summonings, but then you back it up with a strike and you've got every front covered.
So, like, Warning, Strike, and Yang and the Pillars are pretty versatile cards, whereas the rest of them, Judgment was like the most versatile.
But card's banned.
But the rest of them are very conditional, and you could find yourself not in a very good position if you use them, or at least if you play them in your main deck. If you're gonna plan on citing them, certain ones I would recommend citing for certain things. Like, I could see an argument for Wiretap against like Paleozoics, but you might as well just playing Denko Sekka unless you really want the trap.
Yeah, I mean,
so a lot of these cards, there are better options out there for side decking too, but in all honesty, most counter traps aren't actually all that playable, even though most of your opponent can't interact with most of them, or most of the time they can't, at least. But
I believe that's all that we have on counter traps. We'll probably make another video as we figure out more things that we could have missed. So, till next time,
stay tuned.
Stay tuned for more learning with Michael.
Eventually, we'll do story time with Michael, and that'll be a whole different set. And
that's all, folks.